now. You're welcome back to the show. Eoghan Corry, travel expert, joins me now, and you've got lots of queries. They'll be automatically issued to people if they're boosted over the coming days.
Absolutely. What a circus about Djokovic. We'll come back to that. The emails have started arriving. Eimear, it's
super. I haven't got mine yet.
It's big news. The QR code didn't need to be updated. It was one of the big questions: was how would people know that their QR code reflected the booster? In fact, they have decided to reissue the certificates. And they started doing that almost immediately. I mean, it was a rapid 48 hours or 72 hours. But as I said in another forum, I think it doesn't take much to plug the system with all the information about people having received the booster or the third jab, as politicians like to call it, into the existing QR code. But they are being reissued. So people are getting new certificates, and it is arriving by email. They say they will have delivered all of those by January the 15th. In terms of international travel, Eimear, February the 1st is the important looming deadline. The European Union has allowed countries to update their travel requirements so that they look for the third shot or the booster shot from February the 1st. But some countries are already looking for it. January 17 is not very far around the corner. France will start looking for it. And ski lift companies, things like that, when they scan in your QR code, they are looking for evidence of your booster. Irish people until now have had to produce that little slip of paper. It's half the size of the original, and that's their evidence of the booster.
Okay. Well, that's interesting that you say France say on the 17th. So before people travel, they still need to do their homework. They have to check out, because it might be a different picture or scenario depending on which airport you're landing into.
And this is all a European policy. You know, when you're going beyond to America, Thailand changed their policy during the week. It's still messy. But what's giving me a lot of hope is that the central policy that was agreed last July when the digital COVID cert came in is being followed by the 27 European countries. France's for instance, Disneyland Paris is scanning people in. They will be looking for the booster from January the 17th. So some countries moving a little bit earlier than others, but by February the 1st, we really, really need to have an updated digital COVID cert that shows that not just our full course of vaccination, which most Irish people completed last July. So from Patrick's Day on, they will be looking for booster for unencumbered travel. If you're travelling without having the booster, testing may be required. And obviously there's a big grey area about recovery from COVID, which a lot of people, it isn't really legislated for, but people have certificates of recovery in the last 6 months. They have been able to travel in recent weeks anyway.
Okay, people asking so many questions and lots of
let's take as many as we can, yeah.
I have FOMO now. Lots of them have received the new cert this morning, so that's good news. Somebody asking, what about if they have had 2 vaccines, had COVID, can't get the booster until February? Will that affect indoor dining? Wonders Mary, but I don't think that's your area.
The indoor dining, that's obviously not my area, but the hospitality industry is something I cover as well, and I'm very close to. The decision yesterday was that it wasn't going to be imposed at central level, but let's face it, most people running these facilities are trying to do the right thing. So they are, staff are scanning, are checking codes and ID on the way in. And this is where not being able to get the booster because you've had COVID is going to probably affect us first. All I'm doing is reading what's happening on the ground, what's happening at the airport gate, what's happening at the entrance to restaurants. Is that certificate of recovery, evidence of recovery from COVID, it supersedes the booster, because obviously there is restrictions on getting the booster after you've had COVID. Another debate, which is not for us this morning, is that those restrictions seem to be a little bit further out or longer out in Ireland than in other jurisdictions. But certainly to get over that short-term problem problem the listener has, the certificate of recovery is your passport to being able to get into a restaurant.
Okay, so they can seek that from their GP. As regards children and travelling without a vaccination, or
Yeah.
a lot of questions coming in on that.
Testing.
Right.
It's going to still be required. If you don't have your double vaccination up to February the 1st and your booster after that, testing will still be required. Now, it varies from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but generally under 12 are clear. They don't need a test. And that's not under 13. That's under your 12th birthday. The few people have been caught by that. So if you're travelling on February the 28th and the 12th birthday is February 27, you're gone. If it's March the 1st, you're okay. So remember, it's really under 11. Now, testing it got very messy last week. The PCR tests at the airport, Randox and Rockdock are the two suppliers, were all booked up, 4 a.m, 3 a.m. You couldn't get a slot, but that's eased a little bit. I think what happened was the spillover from people looking for PCR tests from the health service meant that they were chasing into the private testing for people who needed to travel. Antigen tests are all that's required within Europe. The PCR test isn't required, but if you're travelling further afield, a PCR test might be required. For instance, America accepts an antigen, Canada only accepts PCR. That's testing will still be required for people who don't have their digital cert up to the third vaccination, and obviously children, teenagers fall into that category.
Making travel a little expensive still, maybe for families.
It's cheaper than it was. It used to be about 95 for a PCR. It's down to 45, and the antigen can be cheaper again. Questions as to what antigen is accepted. The home kit, which has been very controversial, I think in your programme and others have been covering it, that is not really, that's not going to be accepted at the airport gate. Anything, a pharmaceutical one or a medical one will, including the ones introduced done in chemist shops, and it's at the airport. This is important as well. At the airport gate is where you will be checked. There are spot checks at immigration, but really it's been shoveled onto the airline staff that they're the ones who are going to check certification and vaccination status. It's not an epidemiologist from UCD like Jerry Barry or Kingston Mills from Trinity that's going to be checking you. It's going to be somebody who's just working on a contract for Ryanair.
Okay, interesting. And Eoghan, earlier on somebody asked, is it still the case, with Ryanair that you need at least 3 months on your passport before it expires in order to fly with them? William in Castlecomer is wondering.
That's not true within Europe. The Turkey, Morocco, places like that, you will need 6 months. But as far as I know, your passport doesn't have a 3 months access for Ryanair flying within Europe and our trunk routes. Now, I can check that out because you just every time a question comes in like that, it does set off a little alarm bell. Is there something there that I haven't been told? But the Ryanair don't accept driving license. For instance, Aer Lingus would accept other forms of ID for travel to Britain. You have to have your passport with Ryanair. As far as I know, travelling within Europe, there isn't a restriction on that. But if your passport's running to within 3 months anyway, it's a good idea to renew. The passport situation has improved massively in terms of the processing. After this time last year, it was all over the place, and a lot of people who haven't travelled for 2 years are only discovering that a family member's passport is out a day before they travel or 2 days before they travel. You are back in a situation where you can get the emergency, but you will need 4 or 5 days for that. And they are processing a little bit slower than they used to be 2019. It's running to a couple of months, but a lot of them are coming in a little earlier than the date that you're told in the initial email.
Finally, and not much time for this, but we're all fascinated by Novak, and he's in a terrible
circus.
hotel by the sounds of it, filth and fleas and terrible food, and his His parents are worried, Owen.
Well, I think this tells us more about Australian politics than it does about Novak and the international tennis circuit. One of the interesting things is he's not the only one who's in on the medical certificate exemption, but people who weren't from Serbia and the number one in the world didn't seem to be called over by immigration when they arrived. What we've learned also is that the organiser, Craig Tiley, dealt largely with the provincial government in Victoria. So the federal government, Scott Morrison didn't know this at his press conference on Wednesday. They're in charge of visa policy. So what I think we've seen happening is that Scott Morrison, the Australian Prime Minister, has been grandstanding on this a little bit. And there's a great deal of very strong outrage in Australia that tennis players were allowed to arrive in January 2020 when there were such strong quarantine policies. And poor old Novak is, at the end of this, I'm not sure that he will be expelled. I think he might win his court case and be in not just in the court of law, but on the tennis court next week. But it's really, we're learning an awful lot. I think it's far more to do with Australia politics and Australian politicians than anything to do with tennis. It's unfortunate he's caught up in it.
Okay, fascinating. Are you off anywhere nice, Owen, or are you on land at the moment in Éire or Corry?
Tá mé chunta Kildare agus an sneachtaigh tit an níl sé leite ar a talamh for Corry, but I'm back in beautiful Ireland for Christmas and New Year, as is my wont. I will probably be getting out to find out what's happening major trade fair in Madrid, where I'll learn an awful lot of what they're going to in next week, where I'm going to learn an awful lot of what's going to happen coming down the tracks for us in summer 2022.
Okay, and if our listeners want to follow your exotic life, as I do sometimes, they can follow you on Twitter, Owen.
Formerly exotic, but hopefully back soon again. And Happy New Year to all the listeners.
Long ago. Thanks a million.
Míle mágat, Eimear.
This morning and answering lots